Chapter 3, Section 1 is all about solving two-step equations. Two vocab terms for you today. The first is solution of an equation. This is the value or values that make an equation true. So usually when we're solving, we get to the end of a problem and we say x equals 3. That x equals 3 is our solution, and that's the solution to that equation. Inverse operations are operations that undo each other. So we're really familiar with addition and subtraction undoing each other, multiplication and division undoing each other, and then we did a little bit with square roots and squares before. But what I mean by undo is get the identity. So remember, our inverse operations would be like 3 plus a negative 3. Those cross off or give us the identity. And 5 times 1/5, or we could say 5 divided by 5, same thing, gives us 1, which is our identity again. So that's what we mean by undoes. So by the end of this, you should be able to solve one-step equations, two-step equations, and be able to justify your solving steps. So go back to one-step equations for a second, and let's remember some of the properties that we already know how to use. We have the addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division properties of equality, which means that if you have an equation like, let's say 3x equals 15, chances are in your head right now you're telling me that x equals 5, but the reason why we can do that is because we can divide both sides by 3. Multiplying by 3 and dividing by 3 really doesn't like cross off. I know we always like to say that, but it really gives us a big giant number 1 because we just did the inverse. Multiplying by 3 is the opposite of dividing by 3. And then the reason that this keeps the equal sign is the same is because of this property right here, the division property of equality, which says that if you do the same thing to both sides, your equation stays equal. And that's how we end up with the actual answer here. So you use the addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division properties all the time without even knowing it. When we get to the deductive reasoning part, this objective here, you'll have to tell me which one you used when you solved. So one-step equations, let's start off pretty easy. If I want to get x by itself and x minus 3 equals 8, I'm going to use the addition property of equality and do the opposite of subtracting 3, which is adding 3 to both sides. Now remember, we say that that crosses off, but what we really get is a giant 0 here. And we know x plus 0 is really the same thing as plain old x. So we can say that x equals negative 5. Same type of thing for the next one, g plus 7 equals 11. Because I'm adding 7 on here, I want to get rid of it. I want to subtract 7. So the reason we can do that is the subtraction property of equality. And then remember, this really gives us 0 because that's the identity. And then we know g plus 0 is just g. And if you do 11 minus 7, you end up with 4. Now the next one's a little harder because we technically have multiplication and division right here. This is 3 times x and then divided by 4. Or we can think of this as a giant fraction, and remember that in order to undo multiplication, we have to do the reciprocal. So back here in this problem here, to undo this multiplication of 3, we did the reciprocal, which was technically multiplying by 1/3, which we write as dividing by 3. So we can find the reciprocal of this, 3/4. Flip it over, we get 4/3. And if I multiply 4/3 times this 3/4 x, all that I'm going to be left with is x. And remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other, because that is our multiplication property of equality. So remember what really happens here. We end up with like 12 over 12 when we multiply these together. And then we know that creates a big giant number 1. And instead of writing out a big giant number 1 times our x, we say that this crosses off and we just get x. And then we got to do the same thing over here. And remember, you can turn this into a fraction. You can multiply everything on the top and get 36. multiply everything on the bottom and get 3. And then if we simplify, 3 goes into 36 12 times. So my x is 12. Next one's a little easier. 4 and c are multiplying together, so to undo their multiplication, we're going to divide. So we end up with c being a negative number, because there's only one negative here. And then you can think 4 goes into 9 twice with 1 left over, and 4 goes into 16 4 times. So 4 goes into 96 24 times. Alright, so two-step equations. In order to solve two-step equations, we have to remember PEMDAS, but do it backwards. So PEMDAS help us simplify. We have the parentheses, the exponents, the multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So you do this way if you're simplifying. But if I ask you to solve something, remember solving is basically undoing things. So we have to go backwards. You want to undo your addition and subtraction first, then undo your multiplication and division. Then you should technically undo exponents, but we won't be doing that at all in this section. So then we're going to skip right to undoing our parentheses or any other grouping symbol that you have. But for our purposes, it will just be parentheses if there is any. So if we want to solve each of these equations, for A, I want to get y by itself. So right now, two things are happening to y. It's being multiplied by 2, and 3 is being subtracted from it. So remember, we want to undo PEMDAS. So we have to undo the addition and subtraction part first. So that means I'm going to undo this plus 3, or minus 3 by adding 3. This crosses off. Remember, that means we really get 0. So we end up with 10 over here. Has to equal 2 times y. And now it looks just like the one-step equations. 2 times y. So to undo it, I'm going to divide. Those cross off again, and remember that means we get a big giant number 1. So we end up with y equals 5. And we can write it like this, or you could switch it around so it looks a little prettier, but either one works. The awesome thing about solving is that you get to check to make sure if your answer is correct. So I can take this 5 and plug it in up here and double check that that equals 7. So I want to know, does 7 equal 2 times the y I just found minus 3? And some quick math tells us that this gives us 10 minus 3, which is in fact 7. So I know that's the correct answer without a doubt. Next one, a little harder. I have x divided by 9 minus 15 equals 12. So remember, undo PEMDAS. We have to undo addition and subtraction first. So that means the 15 has to go. So because it's subtraction, I'm going to add it. And I end up with x divided by 9 has to equal 27. And then to undo division, remember we use multiplication. So I'm going to multiply this side by 9. Multiply this side by 9. These cross off. Remember, we really get 1 there, and 1 times x is just x. And then to do 9 times 27, 9 times 20 would give me 180. And then 7 times 9 gives me 63. So if you add those two things up, you end up with 243. Alright, this next one can be a bit of a struggle because of that floating negative there. Remember, we could rewrite this as like negative 1x plus 15 equals 12. And then our goal is the same, get x by itself, so we have to undo the addition and subtraction first. So that means I'm going to subtract 15 from both sides. That gives us 0, which leaves us with negative 1x equals 12 minus 15 is going to give us negative 3. And then to undo that negative 1, because they're multiplying, I want to divide both sides by negative 1. So that gives us 1x, which is just x, and negative 3 divided by negative 1 is just a positive 3. And again, you could go and plug this back in. Negative 3 plus 15, does that give us 12? And it certainly does. This is negative 3 plus 15, which is 12. So now that we know how to solve equations, let's see if we can come up with a story and then create an equation from it. So we have a music store, and it sells a copy of a deluxe electric guitar for $295. This cost is $30 more than 1/3 the cost of the deluxe electric guitar it's modeled after, so like the original one. What is the cost of the original electric guitar? So what don't we know? What we don't know is the cost of the original. They tell us what the cost of the copy is. So let's make this a variable because we don't know it. Let's say C for cost. So then write down what we know. We know that the copy is $295, and that's 30 more than 1/3 the cost. So when we read this, 30 more than 1/3, we know we have to take 1/3 of the cost and add 30 more. So there's our equation. The cost of the copy is 1/3 the cost of the original plus $30 more. So this right here is our equation. And then it asked us to solve it because we need to know the cost of the actual original guitar. So before you do this, stop and think, should this be more or less than the copy? It should definitely be more. So if you get something less, chances are your equation was wrong. So to solve this, same thing that we did before. We have to undo addition and subtraction first. So I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. And I'm going to end up with 265 equals 1/3 of the cost. And then remember, this is a fraction, and to undo it, all you need to do is multiply by the reciprocal, which is 3/1. And whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other. And if you break out your calculator and do 3 times 265, we end up with the cost being $795. That's about as hard as your two-step equations are going to get. So last part, using deductive reasoning. So they gave us an equation, 1 equals k divided by 12 plus 5, and they went through and solved it. We need to tell what steps they used for each one. So the very first thing, they just rewrote the problem. So our reason is something called given. That was given to us. We don't need to give a reason. And then you can see that they subtracted 5 on both sides, trying to get rid of that plus 5. So this was the subtraction property of equality. And then they actually subtracted it, and that's what we get in this next one. So they simplified. And then we can see down here, this next bit of pink, they multiplied by 12 because their goal, remember, is to cross those two things out. So this is the multiplication property of equality. And then finally, they actually multiplied both sides by 12. This side we saw crossed off, and then this side they multiplied 12 and negative 4 to get 48. So again, they simplified. So when you guys are answering these questions, given will always be on there because they have to give you something. Chances are you're going to talk about things being simplified, and then you have those 4 properties that were right at the beginning, this addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division properties of equality. So, can you do the 3 things you were supposed to be able to do today? So 1-step equations, 2-step equations, and use deductive reasoning to justify each step. Make sure you write down any questions you have, and we can go over them tomorrow in class. Have a good night.